I'm always on the lookout for products to help you enjoy nature, especially in your own backyard and birds. And I've been testing out a couple of bird feeders provided by Kingsyard, a hummingbird feeder and a traditional platform feeder. And platform feeders are really a staple of backyard bird feeding, as are hummingbird feeders. So let's go through them. This one is a platter style, and it's really my favorite style for viewing hummingbirds. This one holds 12 ounces, and I had it out there for a week, and I had the camera on it. I got 567 hummingbird visits on this feeder, and that was with 5 other feeders nearby, so it was certainly a popular feeder. So the way this works is you put your nectar in here, no more than 12 ounces, and there's a rubber seal around here. So you put the top on here. It comes with a sturdy hanger. And if you need to adjust the length of how high you want it to hang in a certain area, you can add another little chain or a rope or something like that. And it has 6 feeding ports. And what's nice is this has a built-in ant moat. So you fill this up with water, and it acts as an ant moat. The ants have to crawl down this and get on it. Now, if you have a really bad ant problem, the crazy ants might build a little ant bridge or something like that, but really this does a lot to reduce the problem with ants. And the other thing about this is I have 5 other hummingbird feeders, and they don't have small ports like this. They have probably ports that are almost twice that big enough for little yellow jackets to crawl in there and actually get inside. This one is really nice to keep out the yellow jackets, and that's my main concern. I don't really have a problem with ants. And the hummingbirds have no problem getting their narrow, long beaks and tongues down in there and enjoying the nectar. And so really that's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's well made. It's got a metal top that's coated, and it's got a nice solid feel to it. It looks like it should hold up really well. What I like about this style of feeder is if you hang it somewhere where you can watch it, you can easily see all the hummingbirds coming and feeding at it, as opposed to the ones that have a big jug in the middle, and so a lot of times hummingbirds will just be strategically located to be behind the jug where you can't see them. So this really maximizes, feeding the hummingbirds and viewing them. When hummingbirds really get going this time of year, August and September, the young hummingbirds are out and they're all bulking up, ready for their migration. And so the most consistent bird I see day in and day out is hummingbirds, and they'll make dozens and dozens of visits to a feeder like this every day. So if you do have hummingbirds visiting your backyard, you want to have more than one feeder. In fact, you want to take advantage of that, because once you attract a few hummingbirds to one feeder, a lot of times you can put up 5, 6 or more feeders, spread them out a little bit so they won't fight so much. And you'll be surprised at how many hummingbirds you might attract, and word gets around. So you could turn your yard into a little hummingbird magnet. And if you're getting hummingbirds on one feeder, you're going to get hummingbirds on 2, 3, 4, or 5 feeders. And like I said, I put this one out with 5 other feeders that have been up all summer. And in my case, as you'll see in the videos, my hummingbirds don't share. And here it's ruby-throated hummingbirds in the mountains of North Carolina. They generally will not share a feeder, so they'll usually stake out one feeder, and sometimes more than one feeder, and protect them and defend them. So, put a number of feeders out. The quality is good. And they're affordable. These things are selling for under $20. Sometimes they have a 2-pack that's even cheaper than that. And I have a 15% off code for backyard birding viewers that you can get off of anything on the website, and I'll put that link in the description. Now, the other thing I want to talk about hummingbird feeders is hummingbirds are really just about the cheapest birds you can feed, because all you really need is some granulated sugar. This is extra fine granulated sugar in a pound container that's real easy to work with, and it's cheap. I mean, you can also just buy a simple 4-pound bag of fine granulated sugar and do the same thing, and that's even cheaper. Hummingbird feeding is about the cheapest bird feeding that you can do, and probably one of the most enjoyable if you're lucky enough to get hummingbirds. So to make your nectar, and you don't want to buy red nectar, it's generally understood that the food dyes in red nectar is not healthy for the tiny little birds and their tiny little digestive systems. So all you have to do is mix the sugar to warm water in a 4-to-1 ratio. I usually work in small batches, so I'll put 4 ounces of sugar with 16 ounces of water, mix it up and fill a couple of feeders. What I recommend is kind of rotating your feeders out. So you have, say I have, with this one I have a half a dozen feeders out. I have them set up to where every other day I'm changing out 1 or 2 feeders so that they don't all come due at the same time. So like for example, this one I took down today to do this video. It's been up for over a week, and over the next 5 days I'll change out each of the 5 feeders, so I have it spaced out so that the birds don't have to go without nectar, and it's a lot less work. Now, and speaking of work, of course, cleaning hummingbird feeders is something that's essential. And in my case, up here in the mountains, I actually have the feeder in the shade a lot of times. That tends to make the nectar last longer. But still, you don't want to go more than 5 to 7 days without cleaning out the feeder. This one is real easy to clean. Individual ports come out. You can get little cheap packages of brushes that'll fit in there to brush them out. You don't want to use any harsh chemicals when you're cleaning them out. Just basic dish soap and a good cleaning. As long as you clean them off, and if you let them get too bad, then you got a problem. So the more you clean it frequently, the less work is involved. Now I found this to hang nice and level, and it's got a little bit of weight to it. Now one fun thing about these saucer hummingbird feeders is that you can take off the hanger. You can put it in your hand, and if you really have a lot of hummingbird action going on, like in my case I have 5 other feeders hanging around the deck, and actually sometimes you'll be on the deck eating lunch or something like that, and if you have anything red on there, the hummingbirds will come over and check it out. Once you get a good hummingbird feeding frenzy going, you can just hold this thing in your hand and have the hummingbirds come over and drink out of it. Or you can just set it on the table while you're eating, or leave it on the table, and it won't be too long before the hummingbirds will find it. I have one other kind of decorative Kingsyard hummingbird feeder that I just got, and I'll put an update on that, probably put out like a YouTube short and an Instagram reel on my experience with that. Now the next Kingsyard feeder we're going to look at is a staple of backyard bird feeding, and that's just your basic platform feeder. This one is really well made. It's made out of recyclable plastic with a wood grain, and this one comes in brown. I've had a green one in the backyard in Florida for almost 3 years, and it's held up just fine. But you can see that these are pretty classic platform feeder. It's approximately a foot square, and it's got a coated floor to let the water drain out, and it's actually heavier than wood, heavier than like cypress or treated wood hanging feeders. And you can get bigger ones, maybe even smaller ones, but to me this is kind of like the sweet spot for platform feeder sizes. Any songbirds from crows down to finches will find this perfectly acceptable. What really matters is what you put in it. But first let's go over the quality here. You can see the nice brown wood grain. I really like the option of having a brown color rather than traditional green. And I think they have another color. I mean, it might be a sort of a bluish color. But you can see the construction is solid, and it's heavier than wood, using it looks like stainless screws, no gaps in the construction. Classic platform hanger, nothing fancy, but certainly very well made and certainly functional. Now, I have a couple of thoughts on platform feeders. When you put a platform feeder out, you're definitely going to attract birds. What birds you attract depends on how generous you are and what kind of food you use. And I hear people talk all the time about how it gets all gummed up and messy and it's hard to clean. Well, that's from overfeeding. Theoretically, you could dump 3 pounds of bird seed in here, but you don't want to do that. I mean, there's just no need. You don't want to overfill a platform feeder, because then you end up with food on top of food, and moisture is a fact of life. Even if it doesn't rain, it's still going to get moist at night from dew and things like that. As soon as the feed starts getting moist underneath there, the birds aren't going to be interested in it, and before you know it, you're going to have like unused, undigestible food collecting in the corners. That's just because it's not a problem with the feeder, it's because of overfeeding. Just because it can hold 3 pounds or 2 pounds of food doesn't mean you have to stuff it with that and just walk away and leave it for days on end. What I do is every day I just put enough food in there that the birds will eat in one day, and that just totally cuts down on the mess you have to clean up. It makes it healthier for the birds and healthier and easier for everybody involved. So like here is a cup of a nice mixture of seeds right here. Got shelled sunflower, some pistachios, and some unsalted peanuts in there. That's it. That's all the food you put in a platform feeder. And that's all the food that I put in the morning. And that usually will last at least till the afternoon, or it depends on how busy things are. Right now things are kind of slow, so you certainly don't want to dump a bunch of seed in here that's not going to be eaten. And you can see here, this is good quality seed. I don't know of hardly any bird that doesn't like shelled black-oiled sunflower. You want to use a small amount of good quality seed at a time. You don't want to fill this up with seed that's not going to be eaten for 3 or 4 days, and once it gets moist, the birds aren't going to eat it. And it's not going to be able to dry out if it's all packed in here. So you see these big bags of seed, mixed seeds, that are the cheapest seeds you can buy, like 10-pound bags and 20-pound bags at big box stores or grocery stores or something like that, and you see corn and millet and milo and things like that in there. Don't ever buy that seed, unless you're going to feed it to raccoons or rodents or something like that. Don't ever buy that seed, and don't ever stuff it in a platform feeder and let it get wet, because you'll have a mess of stuff that the birds will not eat. Now, birds love millet, but buy real white millet by itself and put it in there. So what you want to do with one of these, with these kind of feeders, is be generous. If you really want to enjoy the birds, you can have one feeder with, shelled peanuts, 3 or 4 handfuls of peanuts in here for the blue jays and the crows and the grackles and the big birds. You can have a feeder, the same feeder with millet, white millet in there, which a lot of the smaller birds will love. And this mix here is really popular with just about every songbird, but especially finches and cardinals love shelled sunflower. So to really enjoy bird feeding and really have the best results, you need a multiple number of feeders, and platform feeders like this, which are small and affordable, really well made and come in 3 colors. So what you want to do, if you're fortunate enough to get a lot of bird visitors and you're complaining about bird conflict or big birds intimidating the little birds, you got to be more generous. Put about 3 of these out there in different places. But once the birds catch on to your good food and your generosity, they're going to love you for it. So if you can get a series of these nice platform feeders, spread them out with some good quality food in different places where you can view them, you'll start to see that you can really have much more enjoyment, and your birds will be happier. And also, be nice to your squirrels. Now, I will put these squirrel baffles on all these feeders that are meant for birds, because I don't want my squirrels crawling up there on the food that's meant for birds. But I do feed the squirrels separately. They have their own platforms attached to trees. Now, if you attach this to a tree branch or something like that, and you have squirrels, the squirrels are going to get on it. So, you want to put it up on your deck, on the outside of your deck porch, or out on a pole, and then put a squirrel and raccoon baffle on it, because they will, of course, eat it. That's what they do. What I used the last 3 or 4 years is this baffle here, and I'll put a link to this baffle in the description for a post. A little bit different. I used a metal baffle for a long time, and they would tend to rust out. This one really works fine, and I've had it on my bird feeding area for over 4 years in the Florida sun, and it's held up well. So I'll put a link to that baffle that I've been using for a long time in there. My backyard birds and I have had a lot of fun testing out these 2 Kingsyard feeders. The platform feeder is very nice, made out of recyclable plastic, very well made with stainless or aluminum screws, very solid, easy to clean. If you take anything away from my talk today, is don't buy that cheap seed that has corn and milo and all sorts of junk in it, and then fill this thing up with a couple of pounds of seed and let it rot in the moisture. That's just going to cause a mess and something you got to clean up. Just put in as much food as your birds will eat in a day, and put it in there when you're there to watch it. I mean, the birds have plenty of other food. They're not totally dependent on your food unless it's the dead of winter, and then in the dead of winter you're not going to have any trouble having the birds clean out all your seed. But don't use that cheap seed, because I don't know a single bird that eats milo or some of those other seeds that they put in there. I've never seen a bird eat that stuff. But I know that rats and not even squirrels will eat it, but rats will eat it. So yeah, this is really a nice feeder, very well priced, and ideally you want to have several of platform style feeding stations. And don't forget to feed your squirrels. Hummingbird feeder is very nice, well made, and the price is very reasonable, and it comes in a 2-pack. It's even a better deal. It worked really well, and the hummingbirds loved it. As I said, they made over 550 visits to it in a week. So they enjoyed it, and they had 5 other hummingbird feeders nearby to choose from. And I'll put a link to the Kingsyard webpage, and there's a 15% off code for anything you buy on their webpage.